Hello everyone! Today's video is pretty self-explanatory. It's a tier list video. Everyone knows how these work, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about how this works, but for the uninitiated, a tier list is basically just a ranking of things from a certain group of things. So in this case, it's a ranking of all the games in the Crash Bandicoot series, excluding the mobile games and 99X because I haven't played those. There is currently no way for me to play them, and let's be real, they probably aren't worth talking about anyway. In a tier list, you have different tiers to separate the best and the worst. So here, Crash Boom Bang is the lowest tier, reserved for the absolute worst of the worst. The next step up is the Come On Mate What Is This tier, which is for games that are mediocre at best. Above that is the Fucking Good tier, which is for games that are good but have some issues that hold it back. The Pretty Fucking Good tier is for games that are really good but have a couple of problems that mean they're just short of reaching the top. And finally, the Super Fucking Good tier, which is for the best of the best. Now, the Crash series has had some really high highs, but some really low lows. Now, I'm not saying that my tier list here is the definitive ranking, but I'm going to do my best to make this as unbiased as possible. Even so, you're bound to disagree on something, so go ahead and leave your own tier list in the comments section. Also, leave a like and subscribe to the channel while you're on your way back up. And yes, to those who are wondering, this video was heavily inspired by the video Whopper Lewis did. Which is to say I stole the idea. Sorry Lewis. Anyway, let's crack on with the video. Right, so we're gonna do this in chronological order, starting of course with the original Crash Bandicoot. Now this game of course is legendary. It was the starting point for Crash, and without it, there wouldn't have been a Crash 2 or any other game to follow. Which means the series never would have reached the level of success that we're seeing 25 years later. Because of this, Crash 1 is held in high regard, and rightly so. But I don't think that means the game itself is the king of all Crash games. I mean, the game is praised for the fact that it birthed a very successful series. In other words, the original Crash Bandicoot is more often praised for laying the foundation of everything that came after it, rather than for being an excellent game in its own right. Now, I'm not saying that Crash 1 is a bad game, of course it's not. I'm just saying that the quality and success of the games that followed Crash 1 don't necessarily reflect the quality of Crash 1 itself, you know? I mean, it's a good game, but it has issues. The gameplay is pretty bare bones for a platformer, what with Crash only being able to run, spin and jump. The controls are a little stiff as well, and it also has a terrible save system. But beyond those little problems, it's a great game. So I'm gonna put Crash 1 in the pretty fucking good tier. Following Crash 1 is Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. This is the first Crash game I ever played, and playing Crash 2 is also my earliest gaming related memory, so it's a special game for me, but I'll try and keep the bias to a minimum here. Now, I think Crash 2 is the best game in the original trilogy. It built upon the gameplay of Crash 1 in all the right ways, changing the physics in Crash's control so it wasn't so stiff and clunky, adding to Crash's moveset, a proper fucking save system. It had a lot. The only thing I can complain about is the fact that the bosses were pretty pathetic. Other than that, it's a phenomenal game, so it's going in the super fucking good tier. Now, when talking about which game is the best game in the series, for many people it's usually between Crash 2 and Crash 3. But I personally think Crash 2 is slightly better than Crash 3. Crash 2 builds on and improves on the classic Crash foundation, but Crash 3 sort of builds outwards and strays from the core focus, namely through vehicle levels. But I will say, Crash 3 is still a very good game, so putting it on a lower tier than Crash 2 would not be doing it justice, so it's also going to go into the super fucking good tier. Crash Team Racing, I mean, come on, it's no secret where this one is going to go. Crash Team Racing is widely recognised to be one of the greatest kart races of all time, particularly for its tight and responsive controls. It's got great track design, it has a proper adventure mode, which is something that other kart races like Mario Kart tend not to have. I mean, it's just really hard to find any proper flaws in this game, so I'm going to put it up in the super fucking good tier alongside Crash 2 and 3. Crash Bash is a mixed bag. A lot of people like it, but a lot of people hate it. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think in terms of the actual gameplay, it's pretty good. The minigames in their own rights are pretty fun to play, but the way that the rest of the game is built around them just drags the whole experience down. The way the adventure mode is structured and the fact that they reuse the same base concept for minigames makes the whole thing annoyingly repetitive. Despite that though, I don't have any problems with the actual gameplay itself, so I'm gonna leave Crash Bash in the fucking good tier. Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex is up next, and I feel like this might be a bit controversial, but I think Wrath of Cortex is a lot better than people give it credit for. Wrath of Cortex is often accused of just being a worse version of Crash 3, and I can see why. It has a lot of vehicle levels like Crash 3, it has very similar power-ups to Crash 3, it has the same warp room system as Crash 3, it basically does everything Crash 3 does. The only major differences are that Crash's physics are different and the movement is a bit clunkier, and there are different vehicles to what's in Crash 3. But the Wrath of Cortex also introduces a bunch of cool characters and has a phenomenal soundtrack, even better than Crash 3's soundtrack I'd say. So if Wrath of Cortex is slightly worse than Crash 3, it only makes sense to put Wrath of Cortex slightly below Crash 3 in the tier list. So Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex is going in the pretty fucking good tier. Crash Bandicoot The Huge Adventure is the first of the GBA games. I've only played through this game once, so my memory of it is a bit foggy, but I remember it being a very solid game for a 2D GBA adaptation of the classic Crash formula. It does have some problems though. I remember there being a lot of leaps of faith where you can't actually see where you're supposed to be going. I also seem to recall that sometimes the ground, hazards and enemies would blend into the background, which isn't good. And then there's the fact that you need all the time relics to be able to face off against Megamix. That kinda sucks too. So it's a solid game, but it has issues, so I'm gonna sit The Huge Adventure next to Bash in the fucking good tier. Crash Bandicoot 2 Entranced was released I believe the year after Huge Adventure, and is the second game in the GBA trilogy. Just like Huge Adventure, I've only beaten this game once, and that was a while ago, but I remember that it basically improved on the Huge Adventure in pretty much every way. The gameplay remained mostly exactly the same, but all the problems that Huge Adventure had were fixed in Entranced, so I really have no reason not to bump this up one tier. Crash Bandicoot 2 Entranced is going into the pretty fucking good tier. Crash Nitro Cut was the next game to be released and was the successor to the timeless masterpiece of Crash Team Racing. Unfortunately, Crash Nitro Cut kinda fell into the same trap that Wrath of Cortex did, where it basically just took its predecessor and made a slightly worse version of it. I mean, the adventure mode, the gameplay mechanics, it's mostly the same thing. I will give Nitro Cut some extra credit though. It introduced a lot of new characters and it did try some new things with the boost system and also with anti-gravity, which definitely helps it stand out from the original CTR. But yeah, it's a similar situation to Wrath of Cortex, so I'm gonna put Crash Nitro Kart in the pretty fucking good tier. Crash Purple. I mean, I think it's universally agreed upon that this game is bad. Like, colossally bad. I mean, I can't even think of anything I would praise this game for. I mean, it's a Crash and Spyro crossover, which is kinda cool, I guess, but that's really all it has going for it, so yeah, I'm afraid Crash Purple is gonna have to go into the Crash Boom Bang tier. Crash Twinsanity. I feel like I'm gonna make a lot of people mad with this one. Let me make this clear. I love Twinsanity. I think it's a really fun game and I love the humour and the whole vibe it gives off. But I cannot objectively say that it's as good as people say it is. It's riddled with bugs and glitches, Cortex's gameplay is dreadful, and the music is hit and miss. So it's a very messy package, but because it's still enjoyable despite all that, I'm gonna put Twinsanity in the fucking good tier. Crash Tag Team Racing is up next. Sorry, I know this game has its fans, but Tag Team Racing is just bad. It's supposed to be a racing game, but it also has platforming and exploration elements, and it doesn't do either of those things well at all. The racetracks are very empty and boring, and you can just win by chaining up with another racer and blasting the competition, and then stay chained up until just before the finish line, where you can separate and just win the race. And while exploring the theme park is cool at first, it gets very boring very quickly. I'm sorry, but Tag Team Racing has to go into the come on mate what is this tier. Crash Boom Bang. I mean, it's common knowledge that this game is the absolute worst of the worst when it comes to Crash games. I gave it a go once and it was such a steaming pile of shit, it was unbelievable. Definitely the lowest point of the whole series without a doubt. I mean, the game can literally play itself. I didn't know this until I saw, I think it was Black Mage Maverick covering this game, but everything in Boom Bang is on a timer, and if you run out of time the game will just choose and do your actions for you, so you can literally beat the game without pressing any buttons. Such a shit game, so it's going into the appropriately named Crash Boom Bang tier. Next is Crash of the Titans. This game is a bit of a weird one. It is essentially Crash Bandicoot Identity Crisis since it completely departed from what Crash games are supposed to be. I mean, at a first glance, you wouldn't even think it was a Crash game if you didn't know what it was called. But even so, there's nothing really fundamentally wrong with the game. Sure, it gets pretty repetitive at times, but the gameplay can be pretty fun, and the base concept is actually kinda cool. So even though this game gets a lot of hate, it isn't actually that bad. It's a bit rough around the edges, but overall it's a decent game, so I'm gonna put Titans in the fucking good tier. Also, as a side note, Crash of the Titans for DS is actually really good, so do play through that if you haven't already, because it's genuinely pretty fun. Then there's the sequel to Crash Bandicoot Identity Crisis, Crash Mind Over Mutant. I mean, Mind Over Mutant is just a downgrade from Titans. The gameplay is mostly the same, and one could argue that the ability to store Titans is an improvement, and I'd agree. There's also the cutscenes in Embryo which really give the game a lot of personality. The new Titans, especially the Grimleys, also have cool abilities, but other than that, it's not very good. The boss fights are crap, so let's thank the Ancients that there are only 3 of them, but the biggest thing that ruins this game is the backtracking. You go backwards and forwards to the same levels over and over again for at least half of the game. It's just padding, and it's not fun at all. However, unlike Crash Purple and Crash Boom Bang, this game can be enjoyable, so I'm going to put Mind Over Mutant in the come on mate what is this tier. And then, after almost a decade of waiting around with our thumbs up our asses, we were graced with the Nsaid Trilogy, a faithful reconstruction of the original trilogy. I mean, it's been said many times before, but the Nsaid Trilogy was the beginning of a spectacular comeback for the orange marsupial. The remakes are, and I think many people agree with this, the definitive way to experience the trilogy. Upgraded visuals, quality of life changes like better save systems, being able to play as Coco, it's just an overall improvement, so it goes without saying that the Nsaid Trilogy is going into the super fucking good tier. Following the Nsaid Trilogy came Crash Team Racing Nitrofueled, which was not only a reconstruction of the original CTR, it was an enormous expansion to it, including all kinds of customization items and characters, content from Nitro Cut and Tag Team Racing, and a whole lot of free post-launch content through the Grand Prix system. This game is overflowing with content, and even the boost mechanics were improved from the original. If it weren't for the long load times and the shaky online mode, I'd say that CTRNF is the perfect kart racer. It may not be perfect, but it's still very high up there in the world of kart races, so this game undoubtedly goes into the super fucking good tier. And finally, the latest entry, Crash 4. Now, I've made a review on this game, so definitely give that a look if you want to hear my full thoughts on it, but I mean, come on. It's no secret that this game is fantastic. It's classically Crash, but also refreshingly, well, fresh. The music is great, the visuals are great, the story is generally great, it just does so many things well, which makes Crash 4 one of, if not the best game in the whole series. I'm not going to say any more because I rambled on about this game for 50 minutes in my review, so I encourage you to check that out if you want to hear more, but the general idea is that Crash 4 is brilliant, so it without a doubt is going into the super fucking good tier. Right, and that's every Crash Bandicoot game ranked. I'm sure you have different opinions, so be sure to leave those in the comments section. Also make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Seeing that kind of support makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.